Princess Anne, 75, has finally spoken out about a secret that has been whispered about for decades. She has long been regarded as the most private and responsible member of the royal family. Behind the palace walls, rumors and conjecture raged for years, creating a murky picture of unspoken realities and unseen hardships. What many were afraid to believe has now been verified by Anne herself, a revelation that would permanently damage the monarchy's reputation. What made her wait until now, though? And what is the true meaning of this confession? A revelation that rocked the throne. Nobody anticipated the moment, especially in such a silent environment. Standing in front of an audience that believed they were about to witness another royal engagement full of formality and courteous applause, Princess Anne was 75 years old. Rather, they faced a completely different situation: confession, not ceremony. It was a unique and unvarnished look into the personal hardships of a woman who had long been seen as the most resilient member of the monarchy. She had been referred to as the hardest-working royal for decades, but behind her poise was a secret that few people thought she would reveal. She hardly looked at the papers, but her hands were on the podium, neatly stacked. She seemed to be weighing the weight of the air as the silence before her first word dragged on. "There is something I have carried in silence for far too long," she said softly. "Let's also acknowledge the effects of aging or seniority." The room went cold. Those words implied that what was about to happen would be intensely personal rather than polished or practiced. For many years, the royal family was the target of rumors about sacrifice, marriage, and duty. However, Anne made herself the center of attention. She acknowledged that she had been forced to repress her own emotions by the same palace walls that had taught her discipline. At what price had she sacrificed her life for the crown? She admitted, "I think that silence was strength." Silence, however, can also be a prison. Yes, it protects you from scandal, but it also buried the truth so deeply that it tainted what was left. When she mentioned love, the audience let out a gasp. How duty had so frequently eclipsed it. Her words had the distinct echo of a royal culture, where outward appearances were valued above personal fulfillment, even though she never mentioned names. It was about a pattern that had characterized generations of royals, not just her personal decisions. Did her admission serve as a warning to the person in line after her? That a tradition devoid of empathy damages rather than protects? When she talked about her late sister-in-law Diana, her voice shook the most. Oh, it appeared to acknowledge Diana's wounds without saying so out loud. Wounds never completely recovered. Anne acknowledged that being honest hurts, but pretending hurts more. And maybe it's time to acknowledge that the crown hasn't always been kind to its bearers. The response came instantly. As though they couldn't handle the unvarnished truth of what she was saying, some audience members bowed their heads. Others wiped away their tears, not because the revelations were completely novel, but rather because no senior royal had ever spoken them before. Suddenly, what had been conjecture was unquestionably recognized. Anne's admission felt more like a burden being lifted than a prepared speech. It served as a reminder that the human need for honesty could not be overcome by even the most orderly royal. Perhaps the complexity of the difficulties you face this year is the cause. Did she do this to make amends or to influence how history would perceive her? As a woman who dared to speak truth in a family that was characterized by silence, in addition to being the stoic Princess Royal, the room was silent as she moved away from the podium. It was not a ceremonial silence, nor was it awkward. It was the quiet of a country that realized a woman with regrets was standing behind the throne. Truths and burdens just like everyone else. Additionally, one question persisted as rumor of the succession continued to circulate throughout the palace. What other secrets lurk in the shadows of the monarchy, if Princess Anne could finally speak up? Although the monarchy thrives on ceremony, its power frequently comes from silence. The monarchy was rocked by Princess Anne's startling admission. More quickly than any royal announcement in recent memory, the confession went viral. In a matter of hours, Anne's words were replayed on television sets throughout the United Kingdom. "Diana was never someone I really loved." Talk shows were humming with heated debate, and newspapers were splashing the line across front pages in bold ink. Disbelief, pity, and rage erupted on social media. By morning, The monarchy was caught in a storm unlike anything it had experienced in decades, and the nation was in disarray. It was a visceral reaction. Mourners placed candles and flowers outside Kensington Palace. For Diana, not for Anne. As if Anne's remarks had ripped open a long-standing wound that the country had never completely recovered from, it was almost like 1997 all over again. Her admission, according to commentators, brought Diana's memory to life. Her kindness, her resilience, and her smile. Some even said that the princess of the people had triumphed again, if only in spirit. Additionally, the collaborations and educational institutions throughout England contributed to the creation and promotion. Why was Anne talking so freely now? Was it an honest moment or a careless comment that could have destroyed decades of meticulously maintained royal dignity? Her candor was hailed by some as the most courageous act of truth the monarchy had ever seen. Others viewed it as a self-centered outburst that reopened the public's long-scarred grievances. American broadcasters reenacted Diana's most memorable moments across the Atlantic. Her visits to hospitals, her walks through minefields, and her affection for kids. For them, Anne's confessions only validated what others had been speculating about. A loveless arrangement had imprisoned Diana. The silence behind the palace walls was overwhelming. With no explanation, Buckingham Palace only released a brief, cautious statement, and without expressing regret. Advisors were struggling to control the rage, and rumors of chaotic meetings and late-night strategy sessions were circulating. However, the lack of clarity merely fueled conjecture. What were Harry and William thinking? Would they ever be able to forgive hearing such remarks about their mother made in such a public setting? Despite their silence, the brothers' sources suggested that they were in great pain. Two young boys walking behind their mother's coffin on that eerie day in 1997. This sea of flowers was there. London was visited by a large number of people, brought vividly back into the public consciousness. When Anne's confession was combined with those pictures, the country once again mourned, this time for the potential harm her words might have caused to Diana's sons. Diana's friends and former employees, meanwhile, spoke up. They remembered the difficulties she had faced and her insistence that there were always 3 people in the marriage. Anne's admission appeared to support what she had said. Diana was portrayed in interviews as a woman whose strength had been undervalued, rather than as a victim. While Anne's reputation waned as a result of her admission, her legacy only grew. Soon after, demonstrations outside the palace gates broke out, with some holding banners that read, "Love is not duty." Others urged Anne to resign, arguing that public trust could only be restored by the following generation. However, there were also softer voices, those who questioned whether her candor was a watershed. Is it possible for the monarchy to endure solely by expressing unpleasant realities, regardless of how harmful they may be? Or had Anne overreached herself, destroying trust that was irreparable? There was no doubt about it. The clamor was not subsiding rapidly. The world, from London to Sydney, was wondering if Diana's happiness had been sacrificed for her royal duties. And as the weeks stretched into months, the same question kept coming up in the conversation. Would the monarchy and Anne's family ever be able to move past a truth that was revealed too late? The echoes of Anne's unsaid truth and Diana's grief show how brittle the monarchy's gilded exterior can be. Let's examine the specifics of a world that few people ever get a glimpse of in order to comprehend what truly exists beyond the golden pageantry. Anne and the secrets beneath the shine. The world always sees the glittering illusion of a royal fairy tale first. Wrapped in silks, diamonds, and golden carriages, it sparkles in the camera's light. However, the reality is rarely that straightforward behind those glistening walls. Princess Anne, whose life within the monarchy has frequently been portrayed as stable and unwavering, is one of the few who understands this the best. But the closer you look, the more you see that sacrifice and duty have molded her story as profoundly as any crown could. Remember July of 1981. In a scene so spectacular it seemed to stop time itself, Diana Spencer married into the royal family, in front of nearly 750 million spectators. Newspapers cried, "Wedding of the century," televisions glowed across continents, and streets were quiet. In an apparently endless gown, the young bride glided down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral. There weren't many aspects of Charles and Diana's romantic life that weren't included in the expanding spectacle. Her smile was radiant but fragile. It was flawless to the world. However, it might have seemed like something else to Anne, who was standing inside the gilded walls, watching history unfold. Could she already feel the fissures beginning to appear beneath that meticulously crafted fairy tale? After all, Anne had spent enough time in the palace hallways to understand that not every bright smile conveys the whole picture. Diana believed that the cameras showed innocent people entering a state of grandeur. However, rumors were already circulating within the family that the crown would weigh more than the dress. Practical and direct by nature, Anne undoubtedly saw that Diana was not only getting married to a man, but also joining an establishment that was older and more stern than she could have ever dreamed. There was romance in the world. That is remarkable since it calls for such creativity and ingenuity. The storm clouds might have been visible to Anne, and that's what makes Anne so intriguing. Her path has always been different. She never tried to get attention or conform to fairy tale norms like her brothers did. She was aware from an early age that the glory of the crown is accompanied by shadows, scrutiny, loneliness, and a responsibility that devours personal aspirations. One wonders how often she witnessed people like Diana struggling under the same burden. When cameras demanded smiles that never reached her eyes, how many times did she bite her tongue? The way Anne handled it differently is what royal observers find fascinating. Anne relied on grit while others relied on fantasy, wherein Diana was forced to play the part of a helpless princess. I see history from a slightly different angle. I've been hit this year. Anne was adamant about being a working royal, whether it was in the fields, at horse races, or handling hundreds of public responsibilities with ease. Was this her silent disobedience? To demonstrate to the world that practicality, not magic, was necessary for survival in the monarchy. The 1981 fairy tale wedding, which millions of people think is a timeless love story, turned into a warning about how appearances can be deceiving. Additionally, Anne's background serves as a reminder of the hidden complexity of royal life. Even as Diana's tragedy played out for the world to witness, she personifies a query that persists to this day. How much does it really cost to be a member of the royal family? Believing they had seen magic, everyone cheered that July morning, but Anne knew better. Inside the palace, she had seen enough to realize that golden diamonds are rarely used to write royal destinies. They are more frequently engraved with secrets, sacrifice, and silence. What more molds a royal, private scars or public adoration? To find the solution, stay in touch. Anne's quiet offering, a young girl shaped by circumstances rather than by choice. Princess Anne bore the scars of an unsatisfactory childhood long before duty weighed heavily on her shoulders. Behind that armor of discipline, however, lay a woman whose early life taught her resilience and perhaps hardened her heart in ways few could comprehend, even though the world would later see her as the unwavering workhorse of the monarchy. The public's perception of Diana as a princess from a fairy tale was never true for Anne. Yes, I was born into privilege. Following the 1917 revolution, a distant relative of the queen was put to death. However, she was permanently shaped by the cracks in her childhood. Shadows that were difficult to remove were left by the divorce of her parents, Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. She frequently found herself surrounded by formality and expectations at a time when she most desired warmth and affection. Could it be that she still clings to duty so tenaciously, as though structure itself were a haven from chaos? Because of this early instability, Anne never portrayed the weak and sincere. In contrast to Diana, she had already established a reputation for being stubborn by the 1970s. That should indicate that there will be more discussion at the conference, more sharp-tongued and direct without apology. But underneath that hard exterior was a person who fundamentally desired the same thing Diana desired. A house full of true love. Yes, she loved horses, but she also wished for something more commonplace, a life not always governed by the crown, moments away from protocol, and laughter at a kitchen table. However, such liberties are rarely granted in royal life. The pictures of Anne entering her first marriage to Captain Mark Phillips at Westminster Abbey in 1973 suggested victory, a glamorous princess starting a new chapter in her life. Even so, there were rumors circulating. Was this a carefully planned union, or was this really a love match, created to appease the monarchy's fixation with appearances and prevent scandal? Anne might have believed in love, just like Diana did years later. However, she entered a system that required allegiance to the crown itself as well as to a partner. The ongoing shadow of comparison further muddies Anne's story. Anne was portrayed as the tough princess who never batted an eye, while Diana was portrayed as the naive bride trapped in a gilded cage. But what if she was hiding behind that toughness, protecting herself from the same loneliness that engulfed Diana? Anne was also entangled in the same web of sacrifice, hidden behind the glare of tiaras and formal ceremonies. Authenticity comes after appearances, duty before desire. Insiders at the palace frequently commented on how Anne, in contrast to her brothers, never appeared to be affected by scandal. But there is still conjecture. Was this stoicism a survival tactic or the product of strength? She escaped being consumed by the same media craze that decimated Diana, by never displaying weakness. However, it is impossible to avoid wondering if her silence has served as a form of imprisonment in and of itself. Anne is hailed as the most diligent royal today. Year after year, her calendar was full of engagements. However, there is an untold tale of sacrifice hidden behind that reputation. Was this a path she voluntarily chose, or was it predetermined for her? She provided the dependability, consistency, and near indestructibility that the monarchy required, but at what personal expense? Fairy tales never existed. We are reminded of that in Anne's chapter. A woman who, like Diana, once dreamed of love and laughter, lies beneath the glitz of state banquets and photo calls. However, she was confined to an establishment that demanded everything and provided very little in return. When the weight of the crown becomes too much to bear, fairy tales end. The royal stage conceals more than it discloses, from Anne's sacrifices to Diana's dashed hopes. The broken illusion Diana's wedding day glitter promised a fairy tale too good to be true. As they watched her walk down the aisle, millions of people around the world imagined that happiness, love, and safety would be waiting for her in the years to come. However, the dream that captured the public's attention was very different from what actually happened outside the palace gates. Many wind up on the streets as a last resort. As I mentioned, the princess, who appeared to be destined for eternal bliss, ended up in a marriage that was characterized by silence, desire, and a love that always seemed just out of her grasp. Where did it all go wrong, one might ask, for those who anticipated warmth within the palace walls? The conflict between individual aspirations and royal expectations may hold the key to the solution. It was claimed that Anne, who was always devoted to her responsibilities and the weight of tradition, bore her own burdens, but the unspoken reality could not be ignored. Diana never experienced the complete sense of adoration she had hoped for. Even in the midst of grandeur, Diana was said to be vulnerable and alone, due to the long-lasting shadows cast by emotional ties outside of marriage. The world took notice. Diana was more than just a princess to the media, a living headline. She was. Every move she made, every dress she wore, and every moment of her expression were all considered as subject matter for analysis. Magazines filled their pages and cameras flashed, and the broadcasters profited greatly from her presence. Even though she wowed the public in private, she frequently broke down. Her spirit was crushed by loneliness, and the hardships that accompanied it were too agonizing to hide forever. In the palace, she hardly ever received sympathy for her struggles with bulimia, depressive episodes, or her agonizing quest for knowledge. Rather, she was seen as an essential symbol, rather than a young woman in pain. Diana was supposed to hold strangers' hands, smile for pictures, and exude the kind of warmth that preserved the monarchy in the minds of the general public. It was deemed an inconvenience if she faltered. If she cried, it was hidden. The meticulously arranged pictures of hand-in-hand walks in the gardens, planned family getaways, and radiant smiles at the palace steps painted a picture of harmony, but the truth was more brutal. Unanswered pleas for consolation, nights spent crying in private, and the oppressive feeling of being imprisoned in a golden cage. This paradox, however, is what gave Diana's story its lasting impact. She became the people's princess, and they loved her for her humanity as much as her beauty. People loved her generosity, her friendliness, and readiness to connect where others could not. However, within the very organization she assisted in reviving, she was frequently viewed as merely another cog in the wheel of monarchy, one that was supposed to keep turning no matter what the personal cost. As a result, we are left with the startling contrast of a woman who felt invisible where she most needed to be seen, yet a beloved figure in the eyes of the world. Was she ever genuinely wed to an organization, or a person? It asked for more than anyone could provide. And how did Diana manage to balance the role that the world expected of her, and the private suffering that it never witnessed? If that was the cost of being royal, was it duty masquerading as devotion, or was it love? Anne's silent battle beneath the crown. The palace's walls frequently felt like a battle of hearts and images. The public saw those walls as glistening with grandeur, wealth, and history. However, the reality was much less charming to Anne, who had been walking those hallways since she was a young child. The responsibilities, the rituals, the never-ending displays of traditionalism. At times, they appeared more like chains than honor. She hardly ever looked for pity, in contrast to others. Silence, however, does not imply that there is no struggle, and storms frequently raged behind that placid exterior. Anne must have occasionally questioned whether duty could ever make room for tranquility. Perhaps happiness had to be made elsewhere, if it couldn't be found in those gilded halls. She frequently carried the burden of expectation without objecting, but her deeds were more powerful than her prepared words. She threw herself into important causes because they reflected the compassion and tenacity that characterized her, not because they improved her reputation. It's truly amazing, Kate, and I hope you've all had a chance to see it. She embraced the controversy while others shied away from it. Additionally, he never displayed sympathy for the cameras, in contrast to many royals. Even when she made an effort to minimize it, it seemed to radiate naturally. In this way, she reflected a reality that the monarchy hardly ever accepted. Ceremony is weaker than humanity. Anne's directness. She was admired and criticized for her unadulterated honesty and refusal to engage in royal theatrics. She was neither the meticulously staged monarch nor the princess from a fairy tale. Rather, she was a woman who was open about her wounds and her strengths. Her genuineness frequently made her more adored than those in her position of authority. However, there are repercussions for being genuine. Whispers grew in the palace. She was too blunt, too frank, and too unyielding. Some framed it as defiance, while others saw it as integrity. Furthermore, such disobedience might be viewed as a threat in a household that valued hierarchy, order, and outward appearances. Some even conjectured that Anne's voice occasionally overpowered those tasked with taking the lead. Is it possible that the organization was more afraid of her openness than any scandal? After all, a voice unafraid to speak the truth could dispel centuries-old delusions. Her personal struggles were also constantly in the spotlight. Like other members of her family, she had to deal with betrayals, gossip, and the media's insatiable appetite for the flaws in royal marriages. The public was divided as tabloids gorged themselves on stories about affairs and conflicts. Was this evidence that even princesses are human, or was it proof of royal frailty? Furthermore, history has already demonstrated through Diana's words that the power of palace declarations can be overshadowed by a single truth spoken out loud. Thus, the most fascinating question that still needs to be answered is whether Anne was leading a more subdued revolution. It's interesting to note that I chose to be here, if you will. She seemed to reject performance in favor of hard work, perseverance, and grit, while others sought fame. Perhaps this explains her perseverance, as so many royal images have crumbled under scrutiny. Even though the crown may sparkle for the cameras, Anne's story serves as a reminder that beneath its glitz are sacrifices, rifts, and a will to forge one's own identity in the face of tradition. She may have been saying more in silence than the monarchy ever intended. Diamonds and duty are common features of royal lives, but the real story is often quite different, one of humanity, sacrifice, and quiet. Anne's quiet strength, and Diana's humanity. Diana's story has never been a straightforward tale of privilege and royalty, complete with diamonds. Decades after she passed away, humanity, not perfection, still holds sway over the world. She hurt, she stumbled, and she exposed the very flaws that had been concealed for centuries by monarchy. In a society that valued appearances, the young lady behind the dresses and tiaras dared to be herself. Her rebellion stemming from that honesty permanently altered the monarchy. She demonstrated to us that kindness is not weak, but can be strong. From crossing minefields in forgotten places to shaking hands with AIDS patients during a time of fear, Diana's defiance was more powerful than words. She was more than just a princess grinning from a balcony. She was a person who changed the royal gaze to include people who were frequently disregarded. Millions of people felt they knew her because of her openness, didn't they? As if she were as much a part of them as she was of palaces. Her sons continue to carry on her legacy, which has not diminished. Despite their vastly different approaches, Princes William and Harry continue to share her passion for openness regarding mental health and grief. Diana's resolve to infuse humanity into royal life is reflected in the once taboo inside the palace walls. As a result of her decisions, the monarchy now discusses vulnerability and well-being more candidly. Silence has given way to conversation. It is now anticipated that what was once far away will feel closer. But does Diana's legacy truly rest with her sons alone, or did she have an impact on later monarchical women as well? Her bravery influenced each of them differently. Think about the royal family's changing tone, and their readiness to show their imperfections in order to let their feelings shine. Does Diana's refusal to conceal her own scars not account for those changes? Over 750 million people watched a wedding in July 1981, but the fairy tale that followed was never real. What followed, the dismantling of illusion, is what has remained fascinating. The fortitude to maintain reality in a palace that appeared to be built for masks. Diana demonstrated that while fairy tales may falter, courage, empathy, and truth never die. However, Princess Anne, another royal figure, exemplifies a different kind of tenacity in the present. Anne, who is renowned for her unwavering commitment to duty, has not pursued Diana's path of emotional transparency. Rather, she has established herself through self-control, loyalty, and defiance. To entice glitz, Diana was the monarchy's heart, while Anne is its steel, according to some. But isn't both necessary for a crown to endure? The backbone that supports and the warmth that binds. Perhaps the question still stands as we consider Anne's quiet strength and Diana's humanity. Which legacy still has the most influence on the monarchy today? The courage to tear down walls, or the determination to keep them intact? We might all be surprised by the answer, so stay tuned. In your opinion, what does Anne's long-kept secret portend for the future of the monarchy? a revelation, or a disaster? We want to know what you think. Remember to subscribe for more and share them in the comments.